Hello and welcome to 8 Cube Circus, a new Marvel Snap podcast where myself, Denish, and Xenaid will be covering a variety of Marvel Snap topics, particularly from the high infinite ladder perspective. We are going to talk about deck building, we're going to be talking about the direction of the game and its balance, and more only on 8 Cube Circus. Today, we're going to be diving into the June 26th OTA balance changes, discussing the nerfs and what they mean for the way Snap is trending moving forward from a balance perspective. And we're going to talk about the buffs and some new synergies or some better synergies that can be found with them. With that being said, let's get right into it. First of all, we've got the nerfs. So we have nerfed Thanos, Galacta, and Red Guardian. What do we think about these nerfs? Is there anything that sticks out to you? What direction is Snap going? Tell all.
Yeah, I do think Thanos is a good place to start. I think it's really interesting. So we keep nerfing Thanos instead of just redesigning him, which I mean I'm all on board for that, and like I'm kind of okay. I don't love what Thanos is, where it's like okay, you have one big guy and he relies on all these little stones, and they all do cool little abilities that give him flexibility. I don't love that gimmick, but I mean I'm okay with it being in the game. I just think it's really interesting that they keep assaulting parts of him that aren't like his base game loop. So this nerf in particular, the big part of it that is a huge deal is the fact that he doesn't start in your hand anymore. So he can't be used in these decks that basically want one guaranteed big 6 drop to play just at some point in the game, just to have one guaranteed big guy, almost like old Chavez, except slightly less busted. I think it's interesting because they clearly want Thanos to be like relevant, but they keep nerfing him. like they're not trying to kill him, but they just keep nerfing him continuously.
Yeah, I think Thanos changes were good. It was getting really annoying to play against him all the time, especially with like 34 card Bonzi. I think like half of his deck building challenge is pretty like boring to be fair. Like every deck's running like Mockingbird. Half the time you're running Wiccan. It's like so easy to slot Wiccan into a Thanos deck. And in general, like, oh yeah, what are you gonna do? Stop them from getting two free energy? Stop them from like you can't really predict their power output. Like I'm a certified Thanos hater. I know there are like a lot of really good Thanos players in Top Infinite as well, but I don't think the deck building challenge is really that like interesting, especially like when the stones have like a lot of power.
Yeah, I think that the Thanos deck building is certainly interesting and something that's changed over the course of Snap. I mean, Dennis talked about Thanos getting nerfed and they still want to keep him relevant. He's proven to be probably the most tricky card to balance in the history of the game. It's never quite felt like he's landed in the right place. It's always felt like he's either the best thing to be doing or he's unplayably bad. I mean, let's look at the history of Thanos. He released. Nobody found stuff with him for a while. Then the old OG Lockjaw Thanos with the Quinjet to the zero cost stones and Leech, and that was madness. And then after that madness, Thanos wasn't too good for a while until it started getting some more tools like Blob. And when Blob released, Thanos was tier 0. It was the best thing to be doing. And then it finally tapered off a bit. And then Thanos got Hope Summers ramp. It got Mockingbird. And it was sort of the best thing to be doing these sort of ramp builds of Thanos. And then they did the big change, which they made Thanos sort of like a Quicksilver. And they took away the ramp from Time Stone. And both of those really made Thanos pretty bad, and it sort of shifted also for the future when they would eventually buff the card to a different style of Thanos, where instead of a ramp Thanos, it's a Thanos where you're using the stones. And it recently popped up at the start of this year with all of the ongoing Thanos decks and the tech Thanos decks, leveraged by cards Goliath and Strange Supreme, which take a massive advantage of the stones. And now that they're nerfing, and then after that, Thanos got nerfed, and it sort of went away for a bit, only for it to reemerge in this 34 card Monty format, where it really used the starting in hand text as a massive advantage. And it finally got the hammer that I think a lot of us were expecting, that it would no longer start in hand and with some buffs to the stones. I think we're going to head in another different, interesting direction of Thanos deck building. I mean, we can talk about the Lockjaw buff later, but I think that'll be a good card for Thanos, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Thanos lean into more heavier builds now, featuring some of the old Thanos card like Cull Obsidian and maybe even throw in a Scar. I know there was a Thanos Scar deck that was going around, and I think that that could definitely come back, and I think that Thanos is a very good home for that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because you mentioned that Thanos is almost like a new type of deck now. I don't even think that's necessarily the case. I think he had a small hiatus where he was a Monty card, and so in that aspect, he is a different card. But if you think about it, what Thanos has always been doing is ramping into other stuff. He's been enabling big guys to get real cheap. Like initially it was with Lockjaw, then it was with Scar, then it's with Mockingbird, then it's with all the ongoing shenanigans, the Cull Obsidian, all these cards that aren't supposed to be really easy to get value. Thanos has always made it very easy for those cards to get value, and that's almost been the problem that they've had with the card, where he is guaranteeing consistency with like old or old space stone or like even reality stone at any point. Uh, I don't think that's actually going to change. I think he's going to continue being a guy that's putting big big stats on the board for cheap because we still have Mockingbird. We have Scar. He's still a Scar target. That might be a thing. With Lockjaw, I think it'll be a lot easier to enable Scar, Cull Obsidian. That deck could totally come back. Not necessarily go in an entirely new route.
Yeah, I mean, I think just like with Thanos, a lot of things that make him good are like how inherently like unbalanced some cards are when they're played specifically in Thanos as opposed to other cards. So like specific standouts this year have been like Goliath, Strange Supreme, Wiccan, Mockingbird, and when a card releases that Thanos can easily abuse, I feel like Thanos is going to go back to the top of the metagame. But I think in the upcoming releases, it looks like Surfer is going to take that crown. So I don't think we're gonna worry about Thanos for a while till another like Wiccan-esque or Mockingbird-esque card come out. I do agree with them enabling like certain archetypes, and then like Scar fell off when Sauron got nerfed, Nightmare came out, so it's like a whole different archetype now. But I think there's some things that are just like inherently good with Thanos, and he'll become meta when those things are like abusable again, right?
So speaking of Surfer, we got to get to the Galacta nerf now. Galacta going from a +3 buff to a +2 buff by gaining a point of power. I am a massive Surfer fan. A lot of people know me for the deck. I really think this is quite the impactful change. I mean, one of the other buffs later is a buff to the style of Surfer that I like playing, which I was very happy to see. But this buff is just very detrimental to the Surfer archetype. They nerfed Galacta, I believe, because of its ubiquitous tech pile usage and maybe as a pre nerf for the Surfer support that's coming next month. But I really think that this makes Surfer at the top of Infinite. It went from like an A tier deck to be doing to probably like a C tier deck. The Galacta Brood interaction now gets a -3. So this isn't just a -1 to her point in Surfer. It's a -3, which scales in this deck because it's using Galacta to hit scaling targets, and that's just pretty harsh for the deck. You're losing 3 points of power in a deck where you're already beating your opponents by 1, 2 in a lane. That's just I'm very curious to see where Surfer goes from here.
Yeah, I think another thing like we gotta really look at like why Galacta was so good, and like Galacta is really good with Surfers specifically because people like abuse the multiplicative scaling. I think honestly like Snap has had a bad history with like times 3 or like things that multiply power with times 3 like old Elsa. I think Cerebro's now back at it, and I think like when they do these +3 multipliers, it actually just needs to be like restrictive enough. Like I think Cerebro is restrictive enough to get like +3. But then like if you think about Galacta, like the best decks with her were running like Zabu Surge, where she got played on turn 3, and you just think about like the difference between Galacta and Gwenpool. Well, Galacta, if you cheat her out, she becomes a 415. If you get like Project Pegasus Galacta, she's like a 421, or she was, right? And then Gwenpool now is a card that's coming out to replace Galacta. Like Gwenpool's scaling is like the same, like it's linear no matter what, unless people are cheating out on Mysterio. So Galacta's buff like was a lot more impactful when you control even now, if you high roll her on turn 3, she's still only scaled up to a 412. Like, it's a really big nerf in scaling for Galacta. I do think, like, she'll find some point packages, but I think, honestly, she's in a way more balanced state right now. Because I feel like before, any card could have used that plus 3 multiplier. Like, even Frigga was good enough to run with Galacta if you could dupe the buff once.
Yeah, I do want to touch a little bit on something we brought up briefly is the general direction that Michael and the balance team have been taking the game. Ever since he started, I've noticed a lot less just tech decks, which I think is very interesting. Not even less tech decks, but less support for tech decks, and they're starting to tone it down a little, which I think is definitely going to push them in an interesting direction. And Galacta is a big enabler for those kind of decks because it's just kind of the biggest thing to be doing. And when you're nerfing the biggest thing to be doing on turn 4, you're obviously going to hit all these tech decks that just want to like Shang you and Enchantress you. And I think that those decks are important to have, and it's also important to be able to flex in tech cards, which we'll get to in just a moment with Red Guardian especially. But Galacta generally is I I think it could have a little bit scary consequences phasing it out too much. Because one thing that I've started noticing on ladder a lot more is people just playing Black Panther Zola at high infinite. And it's like not the main point of the deck, but if you don't have a Shang to deal with it, you just kind of lose unless you can run like a Jug or. There's a lot of ways to beat it, but if you don't have anything, you're not beating Symbiote Spider Man BP Zola. It's just not happening. And so I wonder how much nerfing these tech support cards is going to affect that. We'll have to see.
Speaking of tech, the sort of ubiquitous tech card of the last year, Red Guardian going from a 3/3 to a 3/2. Now, I don't think this change particularly affects a single deck, like specifically like Galacta with Surfer. So I think this is a good time to talk about, continue the point about the tech decks and sort of they made a point with this OTA that are like that they're saying essentially we don't know if tech decks being top meta is necessarily the most healthy thing for the game.
Yeah, I think with OTAs in general, like the most of the cards have been hit are like the generic cards that can just be played whenever. Like I think the biggest upside of Red Guardian was that like he's a proactive 3 most of the time. Like when we were building Surfer or any other card decks like that, it's like what can you play on turn 3 and not feel bad about it? I think like a lot of us are seeing Gladiator being played a lot, but Gladiator's like notoriously bad into specific matchups. Especially like you see the Nightmare, the Hella coming out. Red Guardian turns out like never was bad, especially when people were playing Sam Shield in every deck. You're essentially getting a 3/5 with upside. And then like in certain matchups, like Red Guardian's just the game winner, right? Like Cerebro, you like snipe an Iron Man with it, you snipe Dino with it, etc. But yeah, we noticed like these Galacta, these Red Guardian changes. It looks like they're supporting more archetype specific cards rather than like, oh, like these generic cards will fit in any deck. Like as we're deck building, like more cards seem to have specific roles. I think the meta itself was already like falling off of Red Guardian, in my opinion, as Sam Shield started getting weaker, and as like the generic like as archetypes get better, it looks like the average power level like goes up, and that makes like generic tech cards a lot weaker than like specific tech cards. Like oh, you need to run specific things for like negative, specific cards for like Hella versus like these generic ones don't necessarily cover like the overall meta.
Yeah, one thing to think about with this Red Guardian nerf especially is these low-cost scalers that it was keeping in check. If no one's running Red Guardian, like Thena, Havoc, that deck, it has a lot less holding it back because you can't Shadow King every lane. And I mean, no one's running Shadow King anyways, actually. And I'm pretty sure that deck runs Cosmos, so it also deals with combo stuff. That might be in a really interesting position. I haven't messed around with it too much recently, especially, but that's definitely something worth looking into once you nerf Red Guardian, which is it justified? Probably. I don't think he needs to be a 3/5. I think 3/4 he gets enough value anyways. It's justified. I think incentivizing less Red Guardians fine. But yeah, those small ball Athena Havoc, what else? Like Dracula even might come back into mainstay discard decks. Like a lot of cards that kind of fell off a little because of them might start to come back a little.
Mm. Well, speaking of going with Xenaid said about the archetypes, and they're really working to bring more archetype cards to the game. I think that was a very big focus when they did the buffs for this OTA. So the ones I want to start with are Misery and Absorbing Man, both going into the replicate on reveals. Both of them gaining 1 point of power each. Misery from a 4/8 to a 4/9, Absorbing Man from a 4/4 to a 4/5. I'm going to choose to start this one with Absorbing Man. I play Absorbing Man in my preferred Silver Surfer deck, and I think this buff isn't nothing. So, with the future of Surfer, we can talk about some of the future cards coming off. One of them is Mr. Fantastic First Steps, and that is a 2/2 that is basically a Fastos for your hand after every turn. I think that card is pretty strong with Absorbing Man. Basically, a lot of what I was trying to do with my deck is get a 3 and Absorbing Man on 6 with Hope Summers extra energy. Those were the best lines. So with Mr. Fantastic, there's that to get him Absorbing Man discount. There's Surge to get an Absorbing Man discount. There's multiple ways to get an Absorbing Man discount. And something I've really noticed in Surfer is if you can get this guy down to a 3 cost card, he's probably arguably the best card in your deck because you have a lot of on reveals you want to be replicating. Replicating a Brood now with this guy is a 4/15. That is extremely powerful. And I think that it sort of offsets Galacta in a little bit of a way concerning like Brood. Like that's how you're getting your Brood scaling a little bit now. It's not the same, but it's a different pathway you take to it. And I think that the balance team is trying to sort of promote Absorbing Man going back into these Silver Surfer style decks, getting an extra multiplier with your Surfer buff, with your Brood, with maybe Abs manning a Red Guardian to hit an Iron Man. I've done that before. That's a really surprising play. I think that they're sort of trying to get more into this combo style, this like small combo style of deck building back again.
Just to be clear, you said absorbing man with fantastic first steps. You
Yes.
mean hitting the absorbing man, not duplicating it, right? Because that
Yes,
is an
not
end of turn.
duplicating it. It is an end of turn, is not on reveal. If Mr. Fantastic hits Absorbing Man with a -1 cost, I think it's you can arguably say it's a snap condition in Surfer because of how strong that duplicated on reveal is for 3 cost.
It's so flexible.
Yeah, I think Asman, like, I think the problem with Asman is he's like expensive. Like, he was best when the original Zabu was released, and when he was like easily played for 2 costs, even with like ongoing Zabu, like he was really good. Like I've been trying to play around with him, just copying things like Ironheart, Cass, Sage, and it really feels like he's not good enough for like winning one lane. I have seen like an interesting development where like people are playing him in like C5 if they can cheat out like Wave, Doom, uh, Absman to get second Doom. Like that's pretty interesting. But I think like Absman for winning one lane has generally never been good enough of a card. But when you're able to play Absman and spread out that power, that's generally when he has a bigger, better role. I think like Asman into a Sage, for example. I've been playing around with that. It's not the greatest. Like it's good, but it's not like game winning. Like it's not a reason to run the card. But I do think like Asman into Surfer, Asman into Doom are probably the two that I would try to have the most payoff for. Asman into Brood, like guaranteeing you win a lane. But I think in the current meta, I don't think like there's enough plays for Asman, like as a turn 4 to justify him, and it's a little bit harder to cheat him out on 6 until probably the eventual release of um, Fantastic First Steps. I would say.
Yeah, I do think I want to touch on misery a little bit here as well. I think absorbing man is at 4/5. I mean, especially now that we're playing more combo decks and more ramp decks and less just straight tech decks and mid-range decks. I think he'll probably see play. But looking at this misery change, that's kind of ridiculous. I think 4/9 on the misery is more impactful than a lot of people think. This might be our Michael card of the week of, oh, shoot, what are we going to do about misery? Just give it way more power than it needs, and that'll fix the problem. What's interesting about misery is you're playing it in a lane, and it's eating the whole lane. And so that lane is usually your weak, not your weak lane, because you can supplement it with like demons and stuff like that after. But I don't play enough Phoenix Force or like Mill or anything like that with Misery or against it enough. But from what I have played, it seems like the Misery lane was already kind of tough to contend, and now it's just going to be even dumber because you can't Shang that. Like, I don't know what you do about Misery. It's very large, and it's still giving you the extra demon. It's still giving you extra procs with Fire Hair if you're playing the Phoenix Force list, which I think is very underrated already. The Phoenix Force list. I tried it for the first time. It's really cool. Yeah, Misery seems much more of a shiner here than Absorbing Man for sure.
Well, the thing I think is the Michael part of Misery is this was already a very good card. When we go to Absorbing Man at 4/4, there was one deck from one to two players who were seeing success with 4/4 Absorbing Man. Misery was seeing success in a lot of decks. It saw success in Victoria Hand, which was already in a good position and just got immensely buffed in this patch. I want to get into that when I talk about the Ancient Ones buff. But 4/9 Misery, it's kind of ridiculous. That card was already really good as a 4/8. It was already, I would argue, an A tier card based on just its synergy with the hood alone for how good it is. Now, I mean, 4/9, you biggest body you can't Shang. It's quite honestly a buff that has me scratching my head for why an already good card got a buff to what you could say is probably the best number to have in as power in the game because you do not die to Shang-Chi.
Yeah, I think Misery though, like, is a good like the fact that Misery isn't overrunning the meta is actually pretty good for like the general power level of decks, I would say. Because Misery on like just I would say as a four drop is probably one of the best like just generic drop on four cards, I would say right now. Like I know Denish, you play Sugi, and that as a 4/7 dropping on four is freaking insane. I've been dropping Misery on top of like Iron Hearts, on top of like Iron Patriots. Like you can play a 4/9. Like if Sentry didn't have a downside, I'd probably be playing him. And Misery in general has like an upside. Like you're playing Misery with an upside for the most part. You're getting hoods, or you're getting like I've been playing on Ironheart and it feels really good. Like Misery's playing for a 415 when you drop it on top of Ironheart and like Sam Shield, etc. That power can't be removed. You get Shadow Kings. I've been even just playing it under Sugi. Like it's a 4/9. Like yeah, like you're just hiding a lot of power. I would say even like speaking of that, the Ironheart changes like because I've been playing Misery with Ironheart. Curve out Ironheart 3, Misery on 4. You have Sam Shield on the board. It's like your general curve. I don't know if anyone else wants to play around with that, but like if you have Fire Hair on the board, Fire Hair into Ironheart into Misery is like so much power on your board. It's pretty funny. I don't know how good it is yet, but yeah, I actually really like the Ironheart change because your curve goes so much better with it. Like I believe like if I get a 2 drop out, a lot of games Ironheart's generated like 12 power for me as a 3 drop, which is insane.
Yeah, so going into the Misery synergies, we have some notable synergies that we've already talked about here with Ironheart and the Hood. Those are the sort of two those well, Hood is the bread and butter with the Misery, but Xenaid has been definitely experimenting with this Ironheart Misery stuff. So is there any other notable synergies we think is going on with Misery? Is Ironheart the second best now after the Hood? What do we think?
Even stuff like, because now we have astral projection. If you astral project these cards that have like 0 power and -1 power, even like a white tiger could be something to look into. If you astral project a white tiger, that's just a gladiator stat line on a 3 drop. And if you do it on like an Ironheart, it's I mean, if you misery it, you're adding 8 power to your misery and only really losing 1. So I don't I think the White Tiger is cope outside of like a you might be able to get it in like a Patriot list with Hood, which is now that I'm saying it out loud, something I might be interested in actually trying. Something where you're like ramping out these bigger Patriot cards that don't see a lot of play and then like miserying them or and then getting the Patriot down. I think that is something interesting, especially now with like Talmandala the way it is. But yeah, Ironheart's the biggest one that I think is massive. Being able to play 1, 2, 3, 4, and having the 3 be a 6 and the 4 basically be, what is it, a 15
Yeah, it's a
plus
415.
possibly getting another hood. Like a 415, we just got rid of that. What are we doing? Like, she's back.
Yeah, and we have if your two drop is specifically fire hair, then misery is a 421. Sure, it's really like centralized in like 2 or 3 units. But like if you're playing misery Ironheart, you're usually playing Sam Shield just to guarantee that extra body. And like you play Sam late, and you can move that like 3 or 6 power anywhere on the board. Like I've regularly had 6 power Sam Shields, and that's like kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, the movement is super cool to think about, especially since if you're playing your hood on 1, you don't want to be able to play. Well, you want to be able to have a 2 drop and then still have 3 cards on the board. And I mean, obviously, sometimes the Ironheart's going to hit the hood anyways, but having the option to have the Ironheart not hit the hood, your high rolls are ridiculous. Like it's so stupid. It's so much power.
So we've been talking a lot about Ironheart. So let's see some Ironheart synergies. Misery Fireheart, one we talked about. Sam Wilson is another one that we mentioned as well. Being able to put the buffs on the shield, being able to curve out into a Sam on 2, Ironheart on 3, Misery on 4 sounds phenomenally powerful. You have like one lane that's essentially you're getting a plus 12 in the Sam lane. That seems pretty strong to be doing. Is there any other cards that we think are pretty good with Ironheart, or are these two the real all stars?
I mean, okay, like in High Infinite, it's a lot worse to like do combo-y tech stuff. But like if anyone's just trying to have some fun, like you can put Wong on top of your fire hair, and let's say you misery the Ironheart, you're getting 3 Ironheart procs, which is like pretty funny. Like I was thinking about even trying to play some Odin with it, if we can get some ramp to work out, but ramp is notoriously just not supported that well in Snap. I would say. I would say the +3 is actually like real interesting because you can clog up lanes. I think Firehair is definitely the best synergy. The +3 instead of +2 on 3 cards makes it like centralized enough so it's like it doesn't feel as random. Like I wouldn't play Kahori, but I would play Ironheart just because it's a lot more reliable to get the power where you want it to get. I would say, yeah, and I think just the misery synergy because you're not losing any power when you're putting misery on it. I've been thinking about Ravona as well. Like some Ravona Wong BS. There's not that much Cosmo in High Infinite. I would say might even like those Wong negative decks. Like if we're just trying to curve out with low cost. Um, Anyone can try deck building with these cards in mind, but here's just some strategies that I've kind of figured out.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it now. This isn't as much Ironheart; it's more Misery. I don't know if you guys have tried it. We'd have to live if we're gonna think about it right now. It's almost live deck building. But Luna Snow, you can get like 3 extra energy for both players, and I feel like if you build your deck correctly and you can get the low end consistency enough, you might be able to make use of it better than the opponent. And also, like, it's almost clogging them in the misery lane because you're clearing your own space, but your opponent it takes playing there every single turn to clear the ice out. Like they don't both get deleted on the same turn, and so being able to have 3 extra energy could even enable things like bigger synergies. I can't think of any other than Infinity Ultron right now, and I mean Infinity Ultron also works with Vicky Hand, but just something to think about. I haven't put any thought into that synergy.
So, talking about Infinity Ultron Victoria Hand, I have been playing around with an Infinity Ultron Victoria hand deck for a while, and I got to a pretty good list. And then the Ancient one came out, and I tried it, and it felt good, but it felt like it needed a little bit something more. And then this thing happened. 2 cost Tal Mandala. Now, this change I think is much bigger than it looks on paper because that Victoria hand deck that was already maybe running Ancient 1 runs Quinjet. And instead of it going from 3 to 2, which is a 33% cost reduction, it now goes from 2 to 1, which is a 50% cost reduction. So now, on turn 6, you could play, if you have your Quinjet and your IU down, you could have 2 IU stones. You can play Victoria Hand, maybe even the discounted Victoria Hand that you copied with Frigga. You can play Talmandala to get 3 Victoria Hands. You can play your Demon. You can completely vomit out power on 6 while likely having a prio throw in all likelihood because of the amount of points these decks put on the board these days. So they can't really killmonger you to stop you. Your cards are pretty interactable. They don't know your power range because they don't know if you got like orange stone, if you got purple stone. They can't really know what your range is from a power perspective because you have so many lines, you have so many options. I think that this change is my sneaky pick for the most impactful. I think Ancient One is pretty good now. Before it was like a low C, high D tier card, I think. It's a card that like you can make it work, but if you made it work, it would always be the 12th card in the deck. This buff, I think, is a lot bigger than people think just because of the decks that Tau Mandala and Ancient One were already seeing some fringe play in. It's a massive buff to those decks because of the Quinjet synergy. And I really think that Ancient One is going to be. I think that Victoria Hand Infinity Ultron deck is really good. And I think it's definitely a deck you gotta keep your eye out for when it comes to ladder. Just 4/9 Misery, that's a buff in the deck. Talmandala, that's a buff in the deck. Galactic going away is a buff in the deck because it no longer needs its high rolls to win because of the point ceiling going a little bit down, though it is still high. I really think this card is pretty good.
Yeah, and just to make sure we're all clear on like how Talmadala works, because I don't really play with it that much, is it overwrites the text, right? Of the other
It
cards.
does overwrite the text. So it replaces the text box of your other 2 cards with that. Now, what it doesn't do is if a card is getting Victoria Hand buffed, it doesn't change the creation of the card. That card still gets Victoria Hand buffed. So if you Talmandala a demon that you got from the hood, it's still going to get buffed, which can be a little bit ridiculous. But yeah,
Yeah, so it's not really a Patriot card. It's more like a V-Hand Cerebro card.
it's more of a well, actually, I doubt it's more of a Cerebro card just because I think Cerebro 5 isn't the best thing to be doing with Cerebro. The other synergy I put here is Devil Dinosaur. I think that's something very interesting. I mean, Devil Dino can already get to like 13, 15 power, but Devil Dino's problem is that it doesn't really win a lane. You can throw off a little, you can basically play maybe some tokens with the Devil Dinosaur in that lane, Tal Mandala those tokens, and all of a sudden you've got a 40 power lane with your Devil Dinosaur. I also know that Savage Lance is an upcoming hot location, and Ancient One might be the best card to be playing on that. So, yeah.
Bro, Denish and I are legioning that location. Let's be so for real.
I'm legioning so hard.
Legion
Yeah,
that Legion that location. I'm Patriot Town Mandala. Have fun.
yeah. Well, you're not getting the Patriot down. Let's just say
I'm getting the
that.
Patriot down.
We'll say. Maybe I'll run
I'm running
Patriot.
I'm running Legion in the Patriot deck.
You've heard of Patriot Sauron. You haven't heard of Patriot Hela. It's
I
coming.
used to I used to play Legion in my Patriot decks.
I play Legion in my Patriot decks. I'm a little bit of a Patriot connoisseur. I love
I am a
Patriot.
Patriot fan.
I mean,
That used
That's
to
you
be
know,
the
I
deck
made Patriot
always used
Sauron
to
work,
play.
so
Yeah, Patriot Sauron is my favorite.
Patriot
That's not
Sauron.
my favorite Patriot deck, but it's kind of cool. Um,
One
for
Patriot
Talmandala, you mentioned not being so sure about Cerebro. I'm on the other end. I think it's a really cool Cerebro card. Cerebro 5 isn't the best until you realize Talmandala can take the ability off of your Martyr, your Titania. So now you've got a bunch of 1/5s that you can just strip the ability of, multiply the buff by 3. So now, what are they, 11 power cards? No, because Cerebro
No,
buffs by
14.
3 now. So it's 5 plus a 9. That's what, 14 power
14.
cards?
114, yeah.
Yeah, it's a 114. And if you're that's with Tau Mandala obviously, which doesn't have a stat line, so it's a little bit disingenuous of a stat line, but still. Like Miss Marvel is a 5 power card. There's so many good ones.
actually,
Also,
yeah,
the other one that I've looked at a little bit that I like is Cerebro 2 with Salmandala, which you might think doesn't necessarily work. But what you can do is we have lockjaw now, so you can play it and then lockjaw it back. You'd need a second way to justify it, which would probably be, I'm not sure. You might have to make it a Cerebro 3 deck even with Bast, and then have the lockjaw there for support with a way to buff it. But with if you're doing a Cerebro 2 deck, especially with Tau Mandala, you can astral project Ultron out of your hand now, which I think is really interesting. And this is the deck that I'm most interested in seeing if people get and like can figure out. Because with Ultron, even without Tau Mandala, you can lockjaw your Ultron and it still comes off the board. And Baku's a 2-power card. There's a secondary lockjaw synergy. There's just so many things going for it that are like slightly off. And I think if someone tilts it in just the right way, it sounds goofy, but I think it can work. I think it has potential.
I think it sounds terrible. So I agree with you on C5. I totally disagree on C2. I think the reason like Talmandala is good is because C2 is already like low to the ground. You're playing like 1, 2s, and 3s. So like playing Mystique is easy, right? But yeah, like another thing I was thinking about with Talmandala on C5, C5 can run Ghost. And so if your turn 6 is Titania, Martyr, Talmandala, like the opponent can't really stop that. And all of a sudden, like, that's a lot of power. Even if it's Cerebro, Titania, Talmandala, right? Your whole board is getting plus, like, 6 power out of nowhere. So, like, if you cheat out that with Sarah, Wave, etc., like, all of a sudden, like, C5 is looking really scary. I know when I play against C5, like, sometimes they don't even draw the Cerebro. But, like, and they still have enough power to win. So, like, how many ongoing effects do you really need? Like, if you just have Miss Marvel for a Talmandala hit and you have Cerebro for a Talmandala hit, like C5 is pumping out like 36 power per lane, no? Like that's insane.
I
Yeah,
think
even
C5 is. You can go, Dash.
all right, yeah, even if like you're not hitting the Cerebro with it, if you think about what Miss Marvel Tau Mandala is, that's disgusting. That is a basically a 210 as long as you get the lanes filled. Like 210 is in it's putting 10 power in the side. No, 220 rather, because you're adding 10 power to each side lane on the last turn, and obviously prone to Enchantress, but like not if you do them both on the last turn. It's a 2 cost. You can play Miss Marvel, Tau Mandala. What?
Yeah,
that's
I
that's
mean,
so much.
those decks run Sarah too, so like you can do it for keeper.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think my gripe with C5 is that I like C2. I know I acknowledge C3 is good. I just like the consistency and C5 not being able to really run an effective location changer is what really just makes me not thrilled with the deck. I get that it can put out a lot of power in lanes, but often when I play C2, I find myself like I run two location changers. I run Storm and Magic in C2, which I think has a lot of very
Oh,
interesting like scam potential as well if you don't know what's going on. But with I find that I decent amount of games I needed both location changers, and I also liked having the location changers because so many locations can just screw over Cerebro. Going off the top of my head, Monster Metropolis, Muir Island, Xandar, pretty much all those. Even something as simple as a Monster Island, you cannot beat that. Like you're just dead. Just retreat for one.
yeah, but you can run Merlin in C5, so you do actually have location control. You just play Merlin, and then you play one
But
location
the
spell, which is what you want
Merlin
to
is
do
a little odd because
anyways.
then you're relying because then you're relying on the draw. You can only omniversal once. I
Yeah,
I
think
mean,
it's a
you're relying on
little
draw no
bit
matter what. I
too.
feel.
I think it's a little bit too fringe
I don't
to.
think so.
Maybe I'm just too like.
No, I
I
think the
play Cerebro
weakness.
2 a little too safe with double locations, but I really value having a location change in Cerebro, and I kind of doubt Merlin being the real answer in C5 to that. I think C5, if it can fix its location problem, like if it had old 3/5 Nocturne, I think it would be a very good deck and maybe the best Cerebro deck. But I just think that with that dynamic going on with the locations and how crucial it is for Cerebro to have an answer to that, I think I can see C5 being good, but I also can see C5 having a lot of retreat for one, that kind of stuff.
I honestly think
Quite
you're
often.
you're wrong. about the weakness of C5. I don't think it's location. I think it's the ease of running tech. Because C3, like you can run Killmonger, you can run Cosmo. Like you're running a lot of good tech. There's just not a lot of tech that has 5 power, and for good reason. But like for example, when I play against C3, sometimes I'm even scared of Shang-Chi, and some rats freaking put Shang-Chi in there. Um, C3 like running or C2 running Luke Cage is an upside, right? So I think like the higher you get in Infinite, like I describe like a lot of decks like just as negative decks, which is if you want to run a deck that just does its own thing and you're retreating for one a lot of the time, like yeah, C5 is more that style of deck. Whereas C2 and C3, because you get to run a lot of valuable tech, you can actually like scam out 8 cubers and 4 cubers. Where I think C5 is just a little too honest of a deck, which is its greatest weakness. But like if it's pumping out a good amount of power every game, like it's good enough to compete.
Yeah, also, it doesn't matter how honest you are if you're completely uninteractable. Like you said, if you're playing the Tau Mandala with the Miss Marvel on the last turn, you die to, like, what, Killmonger, and that's it? No one's running Killmonger. Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't matter if you have tech when you have 30 power in 2 lanes.
I
you can
think
also be
this
running
also is
Ghosts.
pretty
Ghosts can also
dominant
make
kill.
C5 uninteractable. I think more people should play around with that. Because if you get Ghosts
Ghost.
down, they can't even Killmonger your 1 drops if you play them on turn 5
Hmm.
or turn 6.
Mhm.
And especially if you're running Merlin, because then you have the Once and Future spell, which is another way if you want to play multiple location changers, just pull Merlin off the board. That works. Like
All
you,
right.
you, you can do that, but you get the extra energy, so you can play like Cerebro, Talmandala 1, 1, 2, 1. I think that's the correct number, or even like 1, 2, 2, which is good enough, because all the twos you don't want to play early. So yeah, you could get. I think it has more potential than you're giving it credit for.
I definitely could be wrong on C5. I know the only real Cerebro I've put a lot of games in is C2. And I've always found like the higher Cerebros, like when you get past C3, it always seems like a little more clunky to make work. But maybe that changes with this honestly kind of monstrous buff. I think this was a huge buff to the card.
Yeah.
Um, but some other things I want to think about straight up Tamandala, speed. That's a good hit. You're giving everything basically +4 in that lane. That seems pretty strong. Maybe even this in Zoo now is reliable. I mean, triple Blue Marvel. If you need to really scale high in one lane, you could do triple Ant Man. You can and fill that lane with like a Squirrel Girl or Shauna on 6. Triple Kazar. I think that this might allow Zoo to get the numbers that it once did and sort of was a force in the metagame in. I think that it's worth looking into, even if I'm not sure it's going to happen. I think that this buff really makes you visit a lot of these ongoing archetypes because I think the problem with Tau Mandala on release was just it cost 3 to get a 3, and you really wanted to play the spell, but oftentimes it was just did not fit into your curve by that small amount on whether it be 4, 5, or 6. And I think now that it's easier to fit in the curve, like -1 cost is a massive buff to any card, including this one, especially one that's biggest weakness was being clunky. I think it's worth revisiting everything that was covered in day one for the ancient one.
I think what's it called? Deck building wise, I think you're wrong about Zoo. I think if you're comparing Talmandala to a card like in what deck it's good at, it'll probably be good in decks that value Frigga or Mystique a lot more. I think like if you could run Mystique in B hand, you would. Except Frigga's just way better at doing that same job. I think when you play Mystique or like Frigga in like Zoo, for example, you're not getting as much value. I think like Tamandala on a speed insta winning a lane is really good. It's better on like those cheap effects that insta win a lane. I don't think it's as good in Zoo because it makes Dazzler weaker. You can't like playing Tamandala means you can't build a lane unless you're Squirrel Girling right after it, right? So it's a little bit awkward, I think. But I think Cerebro
Yeah.
and B-Hand are probably the best homes.
I think the Mystique point is a little sort of misconstruing because I mean, let's look at the most successful decks that run Mystique. They are using Mystique to copy Iron Man or copy Gore. I don't think Talmandala fits in the Mystique style of decks. And also with Frigga, the two best Frigga decks are Victoria Hand, which does work with Talmandala, and Move Bounce, which really doesn't work with Tal Mandala because it just doesn't run any ongoing except for Madam Web. I think those cards are more combo scaling multipliers, which are more used in combo decks to copy these high cost targets. I think the only Tal Mandala high cost target that costs, say, more than 4 is really Blue Marvel. I think that Talmandala is used to buff the other lanes instead of going tall in that lane specifically. I think Mystique Frig is a little bit misconstruing what the card is doing, but all of this is semantics. This card has been buffed for 4 days. We haven't really gotten to all the exploration, figured out what's really good and what isn't. I think the only thing that's really been explored by any of us is that V Hand Infinity Ultron deck. But going back to the buffs, what of these other buffs, so Wolfsbane, Rhino, Professor X, and Lockjaw, are we most excited to talk about here?
I mean, we could touch on Lockjaw. That's the obvious one for me. I'm very excited for Lockjaw. Before we hit Lockjaw, actually, we can touch on Professor X and Rhino because I think they're very similar buffs. Rhino is a really, really cool buff to have at 2-5, especially with the Tom and Dala synergy, but I don't think anyone of us care too much about it. And the Professor X change is just goofy. Why are they doing that to him? He's already dead. Stop hitting him.
I think Pop
What
X
are we doing?
is better with Agamotto specifically, like the Agamotto Merlin shells that run like Werewolf, etc. Rhino, I think if Patriot ever becomes playable, then like back when the power level of Snap was a lot weaker, you would play like Shocker in Patriot and it'd be like a 2-5. Now if you play Rhino in Patriot, it's a 2-7. And if you have Mystique out, it's like a 2-9, except Patriot just sucks. Um, like you really just want to be like Patriot only works with Ultron pretty much. But like if Small Ball Patriot ever comes back, I would look at Rhino, but probably not. And let's just all say the Wolfsbane change is giga boring. But
Who cares?
like who cares? But yeah, I think
Yeah.
unless you have more thoughts on like Prop X, I think Denish starting with Lockjaw is probably a good place to go next.
Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
little more thoughts on the Prof X. I think the Agamotto thing is pretty interesting in the fact that you can just ramp into locking a lane and then either or ramp into pseudo locking a lane and maybe winsing something out or polymorphing the Prof into a 6 drop. I think in Agamotto, which already has ramp built in Bolta Balthak, I really think that Agamotto ramp with Professor X is something interesting. I don't think it's good, but I think it's something that's interesting and deserves to be explored.
Yeah, the Professor X. The other one that I like is Werewolf by Night, but Werewolf by Night's just a stupid card. Like that's not staying like
That
that for too
that
much
that
longer.
that, that card is begging to go to 3-1 right now.
Yeah, that card needs. I don't think. I think it needs to be changed. I think it's the best card in the game right now.
I would agree.
I think it's close. I think Super Giant is actually the secret second best. That is the dumbest card. Right. I don't even know what to
I
say
mean,
I
about it.
think I
it's
think
not
Sugi is
bad.
meta
It's not
specific.
bad.
I think
It's
actually
really
Midori is also in that
bad.
competition.
Yeah, meta for this meta. I
Yeah,
mean,
for this
like,
meta, Sugi is
obviously,
ridiculous.
Suji is killing things.
Suji's a meta relevant card, but right now it's strong.
It's so strong, and I think it's gonna stay like that because what it's looking like is we're shifting towards less tech stuff. And you know what Suji beats? All of the combo decks, literally all of them, except like Dakin. But no one cares. No one cares about Dakin. You could just run tech for Dakin. Even if you're running Suji in your tech list, like that could be the direction tech lists go. You can't run Sarah anymore, but it doesn't matter because you just run Supergiant and then you win half the games accidentally, just because the opponent, like I don't know, can't play any cards on turn 5. Otherwise, they screw up their combo.
Yeah,
It's Supergiant's my favorite card of the week right now.
I've been messing around with playing Ironheart on 3, into Sugi on 4, into Misery on 5 on top of the Ironheart, and they never expect that. It's so funny.
Yeah, not only are you hiding your stuff, this is another thing that I want to talk about for Tao Mandala, but we don't need to pull it up. Is I don't know if it's a bug, I don't know if it's a feature, but you can see the spell. Under Supergiant, you can see which
Yep.
one of your spells,
Yep.
which is way too much information. I
That
could like
that sounds a little. That sounds like a bug.
It's definitely a bug, but you know, it might be just a skill issue. Like I don't.
Are
You
we
can
gonna
Me
see
personally,
a
I don't
live
run
ass
Daredevil in my
OTA?
Suki decks because if you already know what they're gonna play, unless they're a gamer who plays Wasp in Sugi, like
That's my favorite super giant combo so far. So for the listeners, there's a player gamer who's a very good player, top infinite guy. We're all friends with him. He made a sort of Mercury Cannonball super giant deck, which has been explored before, but he runs Wasp. So in the super giant, you see two cards. You think 2+3 or 4+1, and one of them is literally just Cannonball, and the other one he just does not care throwing that lane. It's very funny. Another thing he does in that deck is he runs She-Hulk, so he can play the Wasp. They expect Cannonball, and then they get Cannonball She-Hulked on 6.
I
Which is
hate that. I've
actually
lost to that
funny.
multiple times. I hate that. Like,
I think it's a really cool deck.
yeah,
I haven't seen that. I like that the Wasp
you would really enjoy it,
play
Denish.
so
I
well.
think. But I think it's time
Yeah,
to move on to Lockjaw.
yeah.
Yeah.
I could start on Lockjaw because Lockjaw used to be my favorite card in the game for the longest time when he was a 3-drop, and then Thanos ruined it for me and he got nerfed to 4. I had like one deck I could use him at 4-drop, but now he's 2, and I think it's interesting because it looks like he's filling the same role in a ramp deck, but he's actually not really. What he used to be able to do was you would play a cheap card and get a big card, and that was really good. But also what he could do is he could basically surf through your deck to get your combo more consistently. I think at this stat line, he actually is just worse Blink. I think it's good. It's different. It's different Blink. I think it's worse in specifically Hela especially. But he lets you curve out an Electro and a Nightmare, obviously, which is very interesting to poke into. But for a lot of the traditional ramp decks, you don't actually really need him because you already have enough support in the deck, if your deck is good enough, that you're able to basically put any card like at any point from any point in your deck as long as you don't draw awful. And he doesn't really help with draw. Another thing to think about with Lockjaw that is holding him back a little is we have Blink now, which is one of the dumbest cards in the game. I don't think it beats like Werewolf by Night just from raw power. But it is probably the only thing actually holding ramp decks together right now is being able to play a 5-drop with a decent stat line that justifies your 3-drop that you're ramping with. And this is a 2-drop that doesn't have a decent stat line. And also you play it before, so it's more draw dependent. And also you're not really justifying the Electro because you could play the Electro and then get a hood, and now you played a -3 Electro with no ability, and then you've also stuffed your draw. Because if you're activating him on 3, you're just gonna redraw the Electro. So he has a lot of problems that Blink doesn't really have. To the point that I actually don't love him. I love that he's not a 4-cost anymore, and I think I'm planning on exploring him a lot more, especially now that he is completely different than he used to be. But definitely no prime lockjaw here.
Yeah, I don't think this is the prime Lockjaw. I mean, we have Denish who loved old Lockjaw, and me who Lockjaw used to be my least favorite card in the entire game before Nocturne released. Um, I think that this card is extremely interesting. I definitely agree that it has a lot of the drawbacks that Blink does not suffer from. But I also think that this is extremely strong in, first of all, there was a War Machine ramp deck from Husky Puppies before Red Wing, where it was just like War Machine, there was like a misery in there to get rid of the Electro. I think Lockjaw could be your second way to get rid of the Electro, and that you have Lockjaw, War Machine, Blink. That's three different ways to justify Electro in your deck. I think that Electro decks might start seeing a rise. I think this is a good card to sort of get rid of a ramp downside in the sense that if you can't blink on 5, you're more likely to be able to lock on 2 into shuffling the Electro back into your deck. I also put up Nightmare here for the notable synergies here. I think that Lockjaw might go into this, touching on Xenaid's expertise right here, Sauron builds of Nightmare a little bit. I know he says no, but my thought with this is you're trying to cheat out big guys, you can lockjaw a nightmare and get a big guy for less. It's more of a it takes much more consistent draw, but also later in the game you can be lock drawing a card like a zero or something like a zero or a Zabu or a Surge that you draw late, and then transforming that back into one of the big guys you're still fishing for in your deck. You're running so many of them that I think it's going to be able to really you're going to be able to get more tens on the board, which also could be something interesting with Scar. So maybe it isn't even a Nightmare deck at all, and maybe this could just be a Scar card where you're cycling through your deck more often and getting more tens on the board.
I think probably the place where I think people haven't explored enough with Lockjaw is like Denish point out, you can't just cycle. However, there are certain decks that require certain cards to be played before turn 6. And another synergy that's not on here is negative, by the way. Like negative after Lockjaw is pretty good. A lot of these decks, like the reason why Lockjaw is probably good in the Husky Puppies Goodbird deck is you just want to cycle out one specific card in that deck. It's probably like you want War Machine out, right? And then like if you want that one specific card before turn 6, Lockjaw increases your chances of getting that card. Um, so like I've been thinking about toying with Lockjaw in like my Morgan decks, right? For the Nightmare context, you would have to play Lockjaw into Sauron. Like people are trying to Lockjaw the Nightmare, but realistically, if you're running Nightmare Sauron, like it's worse with Nightmare than it is with Sauron because Sauron is the one that your deck has all those downsides, right? Um, you can also shuffle back in like an Ebony Maw and play Sauron on the same turn to negate the downside on the Maw. So you could play like Lockjaw on 2, Maw the Lockjaw Sauron, but like that's really awkward play line. I was doing with Into the Future on Merlin, but there's not that many cards that like benefit from being shuffled back into your deck unless you're looking at specifically Mbaku. It's good in the Thor's deck because like you want to draw those hammers again, right? But aside from that, I was even thinking like Angel because I've been playing a lot with Morgan, so I'm like if I shuffle Angel back in, it doesn't really hurt my draws that much if I can pull it back out. But I think you just gotta look at Lockjaw from like a different deck building archetype where your deck doesn't have anything to do on 2, and you are trying to draw a specific card by 5 or have a specific card on board by 5. And I don't know a lot of decks like that, except for maybe like Sarah, Morgan, etc. But Denish, I don't know if you have more to say on that.
Yeah, I think with Nightmare specifically, we're looking at it a little wrong. You wouldn't want to run Red Skull in a Lockjaw list, especially now that Sauron sucks and is awful and boring and cringe. You'd almost want to run like a War Machine package with an Infinite. Even like fives are really good with Nightmare, but they don't need to be 5/14s. It can be a 5/9. You can just run Arrow. You can run Cannonball. You can cycle into good cards with good stat lines. 6 drops off Nightmare aren't bad when it's a 6/20, and being able to lockjaw into a 6/20, you can justify it with like a Jubilee. The only issue is then you have to find a way to get the Jubilee out of your hand for Nightmare. I think it has potential with Nightmare, more so than it does with like a Hella deck. I think that is probably the one of the better places for it. But the one that I'm actually excited to try it in that I haven't yet is Red Wing. I do think Red Wing is probably his best home, from what I've seen. Just especially because what you can do is like Iron Fist into Red Wing, activate the Lockjaw. Now you move the Red Wing, pull a card from hand, and then Red Wing pulls a card from deck. And with the Red Wing, you can go a little bit heavier on the deck building, maybe even support it with like a Ghost Rider package, and now we have 2 cards getting ramped on the same turn. And I mean that seems pretty good. I think it would have to be a little bit top heavy of a deck, and so without a card like Hela to justify that, it might be tricky. My thought, and I haven't put too much thought into this, would be you want a some kind of Red Wing Khonshu deck where it's not Hela, but you're still being able to get the card onto the board on the last turn. And the synergy I like there is being able to move the Red Wing on the last turn to pull a Khonshu that you discarded that turn. So you play like, I don't know, Corvus or even Blade on the last turn, and then you pull a card from your hand, and oh look, the only card in my hand is Khonshu, and he has like 8 power, and I just discarded him this turn, so now he has 12 power. I think that space is really worth exploring if anyone wants to get into Red Wing stuff. I think Red Wing Khonshu is a really cool synergy. It's just going to take a lot of deck building, and I'm not doing it. Someone else can do it, but
I,
it's a thought. It's a
Actually,
really
I
cool
think
thought.
Husky's Goodbird deck was running Kate Bishop as the 2 slot. I think honestly, we just slide out the Kate Bishop and throw in the Lockjaw. I think if Husky's playing it, I just don't know if the meta is in the right place for it, considering the most popular deck is that KM posted is the freaking Invisicera one, and every deck is running Shang-Chi for the Nightmare decks. But yeah.
Yeah.
Run Supergiant.
Going back into the buffs, I just have a question for everybody. What do you think is going to be the most impactful buff here? What do you think is the least impactful buff here, or maybe one that people are overrating?
Wolfsbane.
And what is okay? And what is your sort of like dark horse for this is pretty good now? I'll start. I think the most impactful buff here is Talmandala. I think the least impactful buff here, it's such the one that people are overrating, is Lockjaw. Not that it's going to be not impactful, but I think people are overrating a little bit how good it is, just because of all the downsides that Denish mentioned beforehand. I think the interesting one is Absorbing Man. I really think that card goes into the main deck Surfer lists again. I think it's now the premier forecast for Surfer instead of Galacta. I think that you can definitely make it work.
I think for me, the most let's just be honest, like Wolfsbane is just the unspoken, like, why did they even touch this card? Like, who cares?
I have a note of synergies for
I
it.
think a lot of these changes are really interesting from a deck building perspective, just because like I like the direction they're taking with these changes. Because these cards like are actually playable, even if they're not going to be face of the meta. Like I'm playing Ironheart. You know how many decks I put Ironheart in before this? None. Like there's like even the Lockjaw, like it might be overrated, but it serves a different purpose than before, and like people with that card can like toy around like playing different things, right? Even like Prop X has opened a new space in the Agamotto game plan, and I think with the new card Clea coming out, maybe there's some deck building space. But I think like what we've been doing throughout this entire like show, right, is basically like introducing deck building concepts. Because a lot of people who don't have the collections just play meta decks or build meta decks. Like it's really important to look at these small synergies and just see like how does one card fit in with another. Because honestly, that's the joy I find in Snap. It's like tinkering like one or two cards at a time. And I think all these changes accomplish that, minus the Wolfsbane one. Like, yeah.
It's funny because we have Sage. So,
Yeah.
like, we're already doing this. We're just doing it better. And I don't think Wolfsbane is better than Sage in any way. Like, low roll Sage is still 6. Low roll Wolfsbane is like 6.
Okay, actually, sometimes I play against Cerebro and I'm like, I wish this was a Wolfsbane instead of a Sage. But
One matchup. One matchup.
one matchup, and it's not even all the time. Like
It's the matchup that dies to Vipering a Wolfsbane. Like, if you die to Vipering a Wolfsbane, I'm not concerned anymore. That's all.
All right. Well, I think that was a pretty good synopsis of the OTA. Make sure to follow all of us on Twitch. I know Denish streams semi-regularly, so does Xenaid. I am working on it, to put it in
if your stream
short
doesn't
terms.
crash.
But I hope you enjoyed watching or listening to this podcast, and make sure to let us know how you liked it, if you have any feedback, and yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
for watching.
Before we end, schedule. What are we planning? Are we gonna do weekly, or are we gonna do whenever we?
Wait,
think
let me make a comment before we segue, because it's still recording.
Yeah.
Yeah. If any of y'all are like interested in deck building concepts and anything, you'll probably find our socials, our Discord somewhere. Denish and I are pretty big like deck builders. Like we run through like a ton of random ideas. Smiz is like kind of a meta slave. I'm gonna be honest. Like this guy just net decks and like sweats his ring. Denish,
Yeah, we
Just
didn't-
Denish has been finding
just
this
mad my
season, but
deck builds are
on
bad.
like regular seasons, you can find us anywhere from like rank top 100 to like rank. Well, personally, I pumped to 13,000. So, but I'm back to 500 the next day. But like, I really enjoy these like deck building concepts. I think a lot of like Snap is lost on like, hey, we're not trying these card combos out because it might not be good. But honestly, a lot of Snap is just like, are you having fun? Like, sure, some decks aren't fun, but yeah. So in the comments or whatever, if you have any synergies you thought about exploring, I'll explore it for you. I don't care if I lose 8 cubes. I'm gonna be so for real.